screen. Thank you, Sue, for the introduction. Forgot about all those things. So can you tell me, are you seeing just the screen or is it black and the preview? Can someone?
We're seeing the preview.
Okay. Let me get, I apologize. I've done this so many times. Oh. I apologize. Darn. Okay. There we go. Are you seeing it now? All right, thumbs up. Great. Thanks, everyone, and I apologize for that. I am very pleased to be here with you all. I'm sad that we're not at the DOC. I was over there today taking some pictures, and it looks really spectacular. So I'll look forward to seeing you all in person then. What I've done is I've put together a number of slides that provides kind of a highlight of the strategic framework that we did over the past couple of years. And like any good planner, I want to talk about where we've been, and most of you can probably do a better job of that than me. Kind of the goals of our work, where we are today, and where we see this framework setting us up as we move into the future. Talk a little bit about, you know, what the last 18 months have been like and how it's affected our planning work. Then I'll talk about kind of the principles that evolved in the process of this strategic framework. That I'd hit on some of the hot topics, housing and kind of future development. I also have, and that's like a couple dozen slides. I also have kind of what's happening around campus, but I kind of feel like I'm preaching to people who already know what's going on at around campus. So if you want, I can share those later, but I'll focus right now on the framework plan. So as Sue said, it was a very interesting process. It was kicked off back in the March of 2019. We engaged with Buyer Blinder Bell, which is an architecture and planning firm out of New York City. They put together a team that included landscape architect, Michael Van Valkenburg Associates, a sustainability team from Borough Happold, as well as Atelier 10, to really help us make sure that we're looking at resiliency and sustainability as we think about the future. And then we also had transportation and transit consultants, BFJ from out of New York City. So that was our consulting team. And then we had all kinds of internal and external committees, and I'll get to that later on. But as any good planner, it's always nice, it's always important to reflect on where we have been. Some of you have probably seen this slide before. I say it shows how Dartmouth and the town have grown up together. On the left panel, back in the mid 1800s, you can see the green at the heart of town. Dartmouth owned green and Dartmouth Row on the hill. And then this light gray area is where the town was growing. You know, Wheelock Street existed, crossing over to Norwich and Lewiston. Notice there's no Tuck Drive here, but you see town is very concise. We had our first big boom in the early 1920s.
To put yourself out there and always.
Okay, sorry. In the 20s, we're looking at the, you can see the hospital at the north end of campus up off of Maynard. about 500,000 gross square feet at that point. You see the admin row's been built, Mass Row, the fairs, Rollins Chapel, Webster Hall, Carpenter, I think, and the gym is in place by the 20s. You notice Baker is not there. That didn't come till 28, and then football stadium, Memorial Stadium. But you can see growth extending up to Occam. You've got the park and Balch development has occurred. We're extending southeast down towards what is now the co-op down there. Town is really building out. Jump another 35 years and we've got like the booming metropolis of Hanover. We've moved Tuck from McNutt here. They're way out in the western hinterlands. We've moved Thayer, which was over here on South Park, also out to the west end of campus. The hospital continues to expand. Baker Library is there, but the town is really booming. The west end, you've got activity, practically in the river's edge. You have a lot more development as you go east up Wheelock and Valley Road. And then here we are today, much more than just the Hanover campus. We have Sachem Village, which is a large residential development. We've got DHMC and Geisel and Centera, and this pink area are Dartmouth land holdings. So this is where we are today. This is where we kicked off the planning work. And I'm going to talk about where we went, kind of the goals of this work. As Sue indicated, this was a project that the senior leadership really wanted to get everyone involved in the planning work. Not just our students, not just faculty and staff and administrators and alum, but also the community as a whole, the town of Hanover, as well as the region. And so it was really, there was a lot of community engagement to really start developing a common language so people understood what we're talking about when we're talking about the West End or the golf course or Moose Lock, and really come up with options or like a menu as to what could happen to these land holdings, as well as really documenting all of our land holdings, all of Dartmouth's land holdings, and then pull it together so options as decisions are made or as the academic planning proceeds and needs are identified, there are some options out there from which the senior leadership and trustees can choose as to where we go with our physical plan. As I said at the start, in addition to reaching out to the broader community, we had internally, we had a senior executive committee made up of the president and the provost and all the deans. We had a working advisory group, kind of the mid-level with faculty, committee on priorities. They were really engaged with this group, as well as directors and AVPs, working group. And then this just is a documentation of the public meetings. I don't know, some of you, it was really fun to do all this as a planner because we got to participate in the 250th events on the Green when we were celebrating 250 years of the institution. And we went to New York and met with alum and got their feedback. So it was a really, spent some time, in our adjacent communities, talking to them about, realizing that Dartmouth is more than just Dartmouth and Hanover. Dartmouth extends its impacts much further than the town of Hanover. Oh, wait a minute. So we did all this work and this outreach. We were just about ready to release the draft in 2020 June, where it was going to be a moment of celebration. And then March arrived, and we decided to put the plan on hold and just wait and see, as we didn't really know what to expect in March. We spent this summer, well, we did a lot of things, but in terms of the strategic master planning work, we reconsidered the actual document in terms of what we did and what we were thinking and how we were thinking, and making sure that we were really thinking about resiliency and flexibility, and making sure that as we think about the future, that we're thinking about this may not be the last pandemic that we face in the future, and what would we do differently since we had the time. We ended up holding the document. We modified it, shared it with and all along the way, we were sharing this work with the trustees. We presented it in September, and then in November 2020, it was officially adopted by the Board of Trustees. The document that you see here is a 65-page, summary. Provides all the high-level information. We have a 500-page technical toolbox that has the less flashy stuff in it, such as stormwater management protocol, landscaping protocol, transportation planning, more detailed housing work. In addition to that resource, or our toolbox, we also have a digital component that includes a database of all of our land holdings, and their value and size and assessment and everything you can imagine. So it was a very comprehensive. In fact, in the process of going through every parcel of Dartmouth owns, we found parcels that we didn't even know we owned. So it was a very comprehensive process. As we went through seems like I'm missing a page here. Oh yeah, the pretty picture. Did any of you participate in any of the engagement process? I think Sue was there. Wilma, did you come to any of them? I guess you're all muted. So,
but I see John Engelman in the picture. I see Jim Beatty there, who is on our board now.
Great.
Yeah, and I know a number of people did show up. Chuck was at one of the things, and I think Boomer was too. So there's been a lot of the local alumni have participated.
I think this might be back of Bill Brown. I don't know. Is that your vest, Bill? Anyway, this is, I thought
that's me.
This is kind of one of the very interesting, in addition to doing poster sessions in Baker and events in Alumni Hall, we actually created kind of a monopoly board. It was a map of the Hanover campus and the Lebanon campus, and you can see in this lower picture here, the poker chips, the different colors had different symbols on them. Some indicated undergraduate housing, faculty staff housing, where there should be parking, where there should be science buildings, where there should be residence halls, and had a series of prompts, and everyone had a certain number of chips and they got to play them. So it was and then at the end we stacked them and we're able to compile the data to say, oh, the majority of people feel that parking should happen here and there should be housing downtown. So we had a very, as I said, as a planner, it was really fun to engage with so many different people. And, we had happy hour and a half with the graduate students, plied them with food and beer, and we had undergrads creating maps of the campus. So we tried to hit all of the stakeholders. Throughout the process, any good plan has some basic principles. These are the 8 principles that bubbled up through the community engagement. The first and most important, I would say, is, the job of the physical campus is to support the academic and research mission with a mathematician as our president. There was a lot of talk about optimizing our space, utilizing it really efficiently, not only inside space in our buildings, but also how we're using our landscapes, maximizing flexibility. This really became very, very important as we looked at our 6-foot distancing and how we can flip our classrooms and how we're teaching and having spaces for our students to study, really making sure we're looking at the 21st century classroom, which isn't necessarily an auditorium with tiered seating, but flat floors, tables and chairs on rollers, so things can move close and far as you need them. Spent a lot of time talking about the well-being of our students and our other people on campus. In particular, accessibility rose to the top, making sure that all of our buildings are accessible to all, that we're being as inclusive and really looking out for the health and wellness of our population. As we look to make changes, making sure that we're preserving the amazing character of Dartmouth and its 250 plus years of history and its incredible landscape. So make sure that we're taking care of it, but also maybe putting a little more emphasis on some of the outer edges of our campus. The core, the green gets a lot of attention, but some of our edges don't so much. Spent a lot of time talking about sustainability and energy and super efficient use of our spaces. For the first time, we really focused on, a healthy downtown, healthy Upper Valley is important for not only those of us who live here, but also for Dartmouth. And kind of a healthy Dartmouth is a healthy downtown. A healthy downtown is a healthy Dartmouth. And really looking at how Dartmouth can leverage its presence to help support our downtowns, and really acknowledging that this is a multi-centered, Dartmouth is a very important regional presence in the Upper Valley. In Enfield and Lebanon, Norwich, we impact our adjacent communities line, and we need to make sure we're thinking about that as we grow and redevelop. So, most of us really think about Dartmouth and the green here in the heart of Hanover, but in fact, as I said, we looked at everything, and it turns out that we actually have a 7-mile spine of development starting in the southeast at DHMC, where we have about 400 employees, plus half of our med school students are out there, and we're building 600 beds out there in this little corner. So we start here in the southeast and we go for about 7 miles along this corridor, all the way out to the organic farm. And we're looking at the HMC and Sachem, the core campus, the kind of golf course, we call it Lime Road South, Rivercrest, Lime Road North, the organic farm. So a series of nodes, each node providing different important features to making Dartmouth whole. And so we really looked at it, and the shading, those of you who can see it on the screen, the different shading shows you Dartmouth land holdings, and kind of where, and then we dive more deeply into each of these parcels of land. So roughly Dartmouth has about 3,000 acres in Lebanon, owns about 3,000 acres in Hanover, You go to the Moose Lock campus, if you will, that's a 4,600 acres. And then all the way up north, the second college grant, 27,000 acres. Dartmouth is one of the largest landowners, private landowners in the state of New Hampshire. So if there are only 2 pages that you look at in the plan because you don't think it's that interesting, these are the 2 pages. The one here on your left goes back to what I was just talking about in terms of the 7 miles from Centera up to Lime Road North, or the organic farm, with the village centers. Kind of shows you how this all Norwich, Hartford, Lebanon, it's all within the map and all really important as feeders to our local transit system. These communities provide a lot of housing, schools, public schools for our staff and faculty kids. So this is the big picture of Dartmouth holdings, and then you dive deeply into downtown, and these orange slashed areas are areas that we have identified as opportunity sites where future development could happen. We've highlighted green areas where we think are important open space, down at the river, along the bank of up Old Tuck Drive. You can see College Park as an important green space, obviously the green around Ockham. We have identified areas for development, Dewey Lot, even so far as, preserving the north end of Ockham in an arboretum or some kind of green space, and perhaps future development on the golf course, a lot over here. So these are things, as Sue in the introduction said, these are things that we've identified as possibilities. There's no time frame on them. It's just, these are things that could happen at some point should our leaders and trustees deem it appropriate. And I think you're familiar with, the downtown area. This is Sergeant Block, the corner of, the power plant is in here in the downtown core. As you get into the plan, more deeply into this document, we look at each sector. We call them precincts. This is just an example of what we think could potentially happen in the core of the campus. And then, we have another 7 or 8 of these graphics that talk about the pink areas are potential areas for future expansion. We talk about better connections for, one of my favorite is the green to blue connection. Some work that we did just before the computer science and engineering in Irving Center down at Tech Mall started construction. We did some precinct planning. How do we make improved connections from the green to the west end? And we proposed in what we're calling the green to blue, and proposing a path across, actually a bridge through the cemetery that would land in the west end to connect the green to the west end and then down to the river. So each precinct has this level of detail talking about what could happen as we look to the future. Oh, this is a better illustration of the green to blue. So from the center of the green, making a pedestrian bike connection through the cemetery, bringing you into the new computer science and engineering building, which is going to be this great walking space, and then looking at ways to connect us to the river. So this gives you, so maybe I'll stop here and see if you have any questions or comments, and then I can go into housing and golf course stuff, or would you like me to go all the way through? Greg, what do you want to do?
Well, I think that, I mean, if anybody has any questions, I'd say quick questions you can unmute and ask, although, or put them in the chat and we'll get to them later if that's easier.
Okay. John Engelman, I see your hand raised.
And I can't see, there we go. In all these plans, is the undergraduate or the student enrollment taken into consideration? As the growth of the student enrollment taken into consideration as you move forward with these plans?
So we have had, so just prior to, in 2018, there was an enrollment committee report that was released. It was co-chaired by the Dean, Elizabeth Smith, and at the time, the Dean of the college, Rebecca Byron. And at that time, they said that undergraduate enrollment should remain flat until we address some outstanding issues, housing being kind of number one. So as we go back to kind of the essence of this work, this is a framework. These are like possibilities. Should the leadership decide to grow the undergraduate population, this would give you, there's opportunities here to build, additional academic space, additional housing for undergrads. We do not, if we continue as we have been growing, in the past 30 years, that is an upward trend. But we did not look at, any kind of particular growth scenarios for this work. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. It's like John Hughes. I only see about a half a dozen people, so.
Yeah, those are the only two that are up so far.
Okay.
John and Joan. John Hughes, you're muted.
Hi, Joanna, speaking of housing, I'm just curious about the dorm that was supposed to be built across from Topliff on the corner of the gym where the that little tennis court is right now. I thought that was going to be started a year or two ago. What's going on with that?
Well, why don't I jump right into this, and I'll answer that question first, and then I'll talk more specifically about housing. So we refer to that site, which is right here on the corner of Crosby. This is Crosby Street in East Wheelock. This is the gym. You may know this site fondly as the students do. They call that bubble the Onion. And then there's a few tennis courts just to the north of it. We had identified that for a residence hall, roughly 350 beds. We call it the Crosby site. It was proposed as a project in 2018. It was deemed, we decided that it was too expensive to do, and we decided that we would renovate the Choates, and that was kind of the number one direction that we were going in. And then COVID hit and we put everything on hold. So right now we're reevaluating what the next big move is going to be in terms of housing, but Crosby Street is still on the table, as are the Choates and a whole series of other things. So what you see in this graphic, the light yellow areas are our existing undergraduate housing. And I just want to say that Dartmouth is one of the most amazing campuses in that it really reflects contemporary planning ideas, in that you go to Cornell and Freshman Village is off to one side. Dartmouth's undergraduate housing is interspersed throughout the campus, so it makes for a much more lively community. You've got people there at every end of the 250 acres of the campus, except way over here in the football in the southeast corner. But we have this great portfolio of undergraduate housing. Some of it needs some love, for sure. We've identified areas striped yellow are areas where you could potentially have more undergraduate housing. The blue, light blue areas are existing graduate student housing. And then and some faculty staff housing. And then hashed areas are where we think we could get more or better housing. This gives you just a quick picture of some of the design work that we've done so far. One of the things, if I go back here, we've identified, you all know, and perhaps even lived in the Choates. They've been there for a while and they haven't had much in the way of renovations, as have a number of our properties. We have done the easy things to renovate. Hitchcock, here, we did that about, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. We did Newham. Those are 100 beds or less. All the residence halls that need to be renovated now are around, I mean, Topliff is the smallest of, I think, 175, or Ripwood Smith at 140. In order to do this work, we need to either consider smoothing out our enrollment, which would mean, reducing the numbers of students here in the fall and the spring, which are our peak times, and having more students in the winter and summer. That's one option that has a lot of ripple effects, as you can imagine. Another way of creating swing is expand existing facilities, which we looked at the Choates and adding another 80 beds there to the complex. We've got some zoning constraints there, so we can only build on the south side of that site. And then we looked at Crosby as a swing dorm for 350 beds, which would give us great capacity, so we could renovate, all of Mass Row at once, or all of the fairs at once. So, John, that was a very long answer to your question. Hopefully I answered it for you.
Certainly did. Thank you so much.
In addition to undergraduate housing, you've read about and you've probably talked about the housing situation in the Upper Valley. I was at the Norwich Planning Board last week. That was a very hot topic of discussion. I was in Hartford talking to their planning staff. Housing is a big issue everywhere we turn. So we're looking seriously at what can Dartmouth do, perhaps partnering with the hospital, perhaps not, working with the town to see if there are ways to really prioritize our land holdings that are within walking distance of the campus or along transit lines, so we can reduce the use of vehicles. And the town of Hanover is kicking off its master planning efforts on September 30th, is their kickoff event that evening. And we're hoping to work closely with them to see what the community wants, from the community side of the house, in terms of, can we go up instead of 40 feet high? Can we go to 50 feet? Are there places in town, the town's master plan hasn't been updated in more than 20 years. Are there places in town now that 20 years ago didn't make sense, but perhaps now make sense for higher density housing? So those are the things that we're looking to work on in the near future. This is just kind of, I think, a pretty exciting rendering. This is Lebanon Street with the Black Family Visual Arts Center on the north side of the road. The old Motor Lodge, which we still use for undergraduate housing. It's 72 beds in there. We imagine at some future time redevelopment of this block. Could imagine first floor retail, maybe it's daycare or studio space with second and third floor residence for grad students and maybe junior faculty. So that's the housing kind of the hot topic of housing. Are there any more questions on housing? Well, I have the slides up.
Is there any plan for renovating, French and down in the river cluster? Those all seem to be somewhat dated, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'm taking you back here. French and Judge are these two sites. You can see how we've hatched them in yellow and blue. I think these are prime for, some of us would like to say, tear down and rebuild versus renovating. They're actually not, they meet life safety codes and other code issues that some of our other residences don't. So they're not actually #1 priority, to be honest. I think that if we can get through the series of renovations where we are renovating Mass Row and the Fairs and the Gold Coast and the Lord Street Argyle, Butterfield, Russell Sage, Toplift, then we would go to the river. And, if we were to build Crosby, for example, maybe we would just tear them down and do something else down there. But, I think that that is to be determined, but I'm right there with you, Kim.
Hey, Joanna, I noticed that all of the Tuck buildings are orange, potentially repurposed as undergraduate housing. Where are you going to put Tuck?
Well, Tuck has one of the things that came up in the course of the conversation in terms of planning. If I go back to this picture, Dewey Field is, what we know is Dewey Field is the sea of parking. When I was growing up, I think we actually, there were intramural fields back in the day where you could see soccer games going on. But now it's we have about 1,000 parking spaces up here. There's a lot of square footage here. Parking lots are often seen as future development sites. Could we move, when we moved Tuck from McNutt back in the 20s, maybe it's 1932, I don't know, it was back in the early 1900s. This was, way out in the middle of nowhere. Could we move Tuck to a new campus, state-of-the-art, new pedagogy, new business school to Dewey Field? Or could we move it to the golf course? Or, so that's what some of the crazy thinking that went on as we looked at these buildings here. Another option would be, you keep, Tuck is like a train. Those of you who are familiar with this is, you could say Buchanan is the engine or the caboose, but all of Tuck's buildings are connected underground. The joke is that some students who live there don't even have to leave ever, because you've got food and burn, you've got a gym in there, you've got beds, classrooms, but it's a very linear campus. And it's somewhat constrained. So we looked at, if they really would like more beds. If we were to take down Judge and French, maybe they would grow this way. On the other hand, maybe they could all fit in Dewey Lot and have parking underneath and have their own campus, or maybe they go north. But none of these things happen quickly. These are just ideas.
Joanne, it seems to me there's some logic to moving the med school out to the hospital site. Is that under consideration?
Yeah, and so I think that certainly when we played Monopoly, I would say, and we spent a fair amount of time with the Geisel, we had the dean and the various different players from Geisel, actually even the undergrad, the med students and PhD students met with us. I would say it's a 50-50 split. A number of our Geisel colleagues are like, hey, don't give this site to Tuck. We think that would be a great place for a new lab, new, medical school where you're, we still can have our connections to the campus, but we live here. We talked about these Remsen and Vale, which we could never build a building that high in current zoning. So you would hate to lose that square footage, but they're double loaded corridors. We did a test fit. We could fit 500 beds in there. You could have classrooms and food on the first floor and have, 300 to 500 undergraduate beds if you repurposed these two buildings and moved your med school there. So about 50% of the people said, there's no way we cannot have a Hanover address. Our labs really need undergraduate researchers. We need those people because our med school isn't big enough to help us with our research. We need to stay on campus. The other 50% were like, we should have everything up at DHMC. It's state of the art. It's where all of our colleagues are. And we can have all of our graduate students living adjacent to the school. So I would say it's pretty much 50-50. And it's something that, senior leaders and trustees will have to tackle over, in the near future, because certainly Remsen and Vale are soon approaching their useful life as research labs. So I thought I would just wrap up with just this image. I alluded to this earlier. We looked at about 68 properties, individual properties, we have about 350 acres in the institutional zone, which allows for, development by an institution, Dartmouth, or, Hanover High School, or the, St. Thomas Church is another institution to grow in the I zone. We looked at options, how land should or could be used, important natural features, Girl Brook, highly erodible soils. There's a great trail system in here. And then we also looked at we looked at about 70 buildings. We have more buildings than that, and did an assessment on those. And we identified, what needs to be renovated and what we think might, like we talked about French and Judge, how maybe we just tear those down. Sorry about that. And so I think an important takeaway, if this is a strategic framework, there's a lot of possibilities. I think as we look to the precincts that we've identified at a high level in terms of the opportunities are, I think we need to dive more deeply as we get direction from our leadership as to what the future is going to hold in terms of our academic and research future, and as someone asked earlier, where our enrollment goes. And then we dive deeply into these precincts to make sure that we're, adhering to the principles that we identified that are so critical to a healthy Dartmouth in terms of not only healthy students, but, preserving and growing with care. So I think that's it. I probably have exceeded my time. Nope, guess I'm still good. So I do have this, this is what's going on around campus, but that's probably for another time. Any questions?
So go ahead and raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have a question for Joanna. No need to be shy.
Joanna, this is David Walden. I live out on East Wheelock. And I noticed that students still think that it's an impossible walk from campus to A-Lot. So one thing hasn't changed, but it brings up the issue of transportation and a planning corridor that's 7 miles long, and my guess is that its widest maybe 2.5 or 3 miles wide. Just to kind of start that conversation, I notice in the framework booklet that there's suggestions about shuttles and bike paths. The bike paths kind of tickled me because I wondered what the alternative to them was in the winter. Would you talk a little bit about transportation? Because if you're going to expand critical parts of the campus beyond walkability limits, you've got to have transportation.
Exactly. And for the size of our community, we're very fortunate that we have the advanced transit, which is, lives in Vermont, and we're very fortunate to have a state that is committed to public transit, unlike New Hampshire, which spends $100,000 on public transit throughout the state. So AT is in Vermont because Vermont believes in transit. We're really fortunate that we benefit from it, and our people do. All of the routes of AT come through Hanover. In order for us to have have students living out at DHMC, one of the requirements actually of this graduate student housing complex that's under construction, you can check it out. It's right here in the southwest corner of Lahar Drive. There's 600 or so beds out there, and part of that development is requiring a transit service. And it's going to be a good test to see how well we can do that job of shuttling students from here to there. And if we really want to do anything to the north end of campus, or even A-Lot, our transit has to be more robust than it is. We have put our foot in the water on that. We shuttle people from the Lewiston parking lot up to campus. We have shuttles that come from Sept to Tuck. But you're absolutely right. If we go north, we're going to have a better shuttle system than we do, a better transportation system. In terms of biking, there can be a much improved bike system, and a lot of our students are really hardy, and so are some of our faculty and staff who bike year round. But what we really need is better infrastructure for that, and that translates into, like what you see on Lime Road, the multi-use path that is paved and is separate from the road. So those of us who are cautious cyclers feel safe. So that's what it's going to take. The town did just receive grant money to improve from Chase Field, from our athletic complex over through Verona and along the Girlbrook sewer easement. So that will become, it was a pretty nice part of the infrastructure bill, $350,000 to make that a good biking route. So
I have a quick
no particular answers, but I know that it is definitely an issue.
I have a transportation question. Is there any long-range thought to better roads from, say, the south end of the hospital down to Route 10 and possibly across the river? Another river crossing besides the Ledyard Bridge.
So, when DH was, when they were doing the planning for DHMC back in the 80s, there were all kinds of studies done trying to get through this conservation land, like from the east to the west. That has kind of it's been on my shelf for the past 15 years while I've been at Dartmouth. Hasn't really gone anywhere, but part of this planning process, we did identify the importance of this corridor, and basically have recommended going from Route 10 here, down at the Sachem Fields, along this road and connecting. That's what this is, a limited access road. So it would only be for transit and emergency vehicles, which I think would be a huge help in terms of traffic in the downtown core. So that is part of the strategic framework.
But nothing to cross the river.
Nothing to cross the river. We did not go there. And that is a very important regional planning question. There is an Upper Valley Transportation Management Group. They meet, in fact, there's a meeting tomorrow, the third Thursday of every month, where all the transit providers in all 5 of the big towns in the Upper Valley get together and discuss this. I think the most recent accomplishment is probably the Claremont bus. That's been something we've been working on for a long time. I'm not sure there's an appetite for that. Quite frankly, I don't know.
Got about 4 hands up there, Joanna.
Okay, I'm gonna have to, I can't see, so can somebody else
Sure.
facilitate the questions, please?
Let's let, John, you've asked a bunch of questions, so let's let Barry go next.
There I go, I can see.
Okay. Hi, Joanna.
Thank you,
Carrie.
Greg.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi. Hey, Lewis, speaking of crossing the river, Lewiston is a fantastic location, a great asset to the college. It doesn't seem like it's, fully utilized for its potential. Can you give us a sense of what the long-term picture might look like for that Lewiston site?
Funny you should ask. At the Norwich Planning Commission meeting last week, they asked me the same question, and they're in the throes. They've identified, we worked with them as they were preparing their master plan. We worked with them to consider it. That has always been like a rural residential zone. We worked with them to consider that a mixed use zone. They are going forward with zoning changes, and hopefully we can work with them to, potentially there's something there. There's no water, there's no sewer. It would have to come from, I'm sure it would have to come from Hanover. So it's a really small site though, Carrie. It's tiny. What we do have, so I think it's like 4 acres. I mean, it's smaller than the green. It's really small, and there's the railroad right of way, and then you've got the X Club, thank you,
right.
which is privately owned. What we do, there is another piece of land adjacent to Montshire that the college owns, but that is really limited access as well. So, but Lewiston, it's ripe for some really cool development. It would be awesome housing, I think, and mixed use, or, coffee place, but it's very small.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Barry Harwick.
Thanks, Greg. Joanna, my question would be about RiverQuest. I've read some of the planning materials there, and it said remediation work would have to be done before that site can be redeveloped. How difficult is that to do?
So I am not on the neighborhood committee. I don't serve on that committee with the CREL, the TCE leak that happened there. My understanding is that it can be cleaned up, but we're waiting for the federal government to clean it up. That's my understanding. So I think, to answer your question, yes, it can be cleaned up. I think that it needs to be cleaned up before Dartmouth will take the leap of building on there, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, for me, it's the ideal location for staff and faculty housing. There are, you know, there's DHMC owns a bit of it. And so there is a little bit of, you know, there's a little bit of an encumbrance there. The TCE is the biggest thing. I think there's, you know, back in what, 2008, maybe there was a development plan with 230 units. It would go a long way to help the housing. It's right on the Brown Route. It's walkable. It's a great location for families to live. It can be a great intergenerational development site. It is a great intergenerational development site.
Is some of that possibly going to Kendall?
You know, I am not sure. There's probably a Kendall person here that could answer that question. Anyone else?
More questions?
I want to know, this is Sue Reed, this is a silly question. What were the lands you didn't realize the college owned?
It was just a tiny piece of the Hanover Nursery School, which is on the corner of Valley and East Wheelock, is actually, Dartmouth owns it. You know, we didn't know that. Well, and let's be fair, you know, people come and go, and not everyone, perhaps we didn't have everyone who knows everything at Dartmouth at the table, but we were like, oh, look at that. It's just a small lot. It's maybe a third of an acre. But that was the piece too.
Okay.
Joanna, the college sold Maneri, which was over in the more eastern part of the state a number of years ago. Is there any other property that's, you know, well, you mentioned the grant, but is there any other property that is more like a Maneri type?
You know, we have a forest in Corinth. It's a couple hundred acres, but it's not a Maneri type.
Okay.
It's a forest. We don't really, you know, Maneri Center is now at the Hanover Inn. But yeah, there's nothing quite like what was at Squam.
Can we buy it back?
Yeah. You know, I think there's always, you know, with enough money, you can probably do that.
The class of 1966 Maneri Center on Squam Lake, right,
Yeah.
Charles? Chuck?
Pony up, Chuck, pony up.
How about the class of 1966 undergraduate residential facility, residential hall?
There you go.
That's what I'm pushing for.
So
Go ahead, Sue.
Oh, I was just going to comment that one of the things that Joanna said during some of the workshops was how complex. You think of it as a simple campus, but we've got an Army base here. We have a cemetery in the middle of campus. We have a national park going through the middle of campus. So there's a lot of stakeholders that you don't even think about that are involved, and which makes it fascinating. Yeah, the Appalachian Trail, yeah, which makes it very fascinating to try and it changes seasonally, and I think that was something some of our outside consultants hadn't really thought about, the cold and warm times of year.
I think one of the interesting things as we work with the students, the consultants were surprised by this. They're like, wow, some of these drawings, the maps, we had students, you know, map by term, their campus, you know, and often, you know, if they lived at McLaughlin cluster at the north end, it basically went from McLaughlin across Maynard, they would cut through Barry Baker, go down Main Street, you know, and we asked them to label things, and they called these areas as they cut through buildings, whether it's, you know, the library or the hop, they're warm cuts. You know, they're not shortcuts, they're warm cuts because it's such a cold place to live for so many people. So those are some interesting Dartmouth terms, I think.
John Hughes,
And-
do you want to, I know, John, you have your hand up, so, and you probably have another question.
Well, my second question, just as a statement, I will say that I'm a class of 66 with Chuck Sherman, and both of us work in the information booth on the green half a day a week. And I'm just curious because people always ask about the construction going on because of what's going on across the street at Dartmouth Hall. But what's the next big construction project going on campus, or Joanna?
John, I think the next big construction project has to do with our energy system. And essentially the institution has decided to convert from steam to hot water heat, which basically means we're going to be digging up the whole place to install hot water pipes. We experienced that a couple years ago when we came from the north end of campus down Tuck Mall with water lines and chilled water lines. And we're in the midst of planning, where do we start on the outside and move in? So as Dartmouth Hall, all of those buildings have been renovated. Thornton Reed and now Dartmouth Hall have been renovated to go away from steam. They're going to have they have hot and chilled water. So they have AC and they have a hot water heat system, which you're not going to hear the clanking of the radiators anymore. It's a much more efficient heat, about 25% more efficient than steam. So I would say that that's going to be the biggest disruption to the campus.
Where's the next line going to go? Do you know?
We have not decided. I think it also depends on where we end up. Should we move forward with undergraduate housing? So does that mean we start on the southeast side? Because we have to, we've got a steam line that is right adjacent to the Onion, and that serves Alumni Gym, Florin, Thompson, Leverone. So do we, is that where we start? Or if we choose not to do Crosby and we do the Choates, do we, go to the northwest up there? So a lot of things we're very flexible, if you will, in the planning and engineering departments as we work on that. So I don't have an answer right now.
Joanna, sort of connected to John Hughes' question where he mentioned the info booth. Does the college have any printed copies of the plan? I know that there's an online PDF version of it, which I'll send out in the next newsletter when I give a report on this event. But it might be interesting to be able to grab a couple of paper copies to put in the booth, if only to have people look at them and see, what other construction plans might be potentially in the future.
Sure, I can, there's a supply at our offices over at Fort Courier, but I'm happy to drop off a half a dozen. And if there are people here that would like a copy, if you can get a total, I'm happy to give them out.
Sure, yeah, if anybody is interested in getting a copy, why don't you email me and we'll coordinate on a total to get to Joanna.
Just to inform everyone, the information booth, the last day of operation will be this Friday, and then we close for the season.
And I have a couple of info booth green questions. One is, and I don't work in the info booth, but I quite often stop in and chat with them. They're always being asked for a place to take a selfie by campus visitors who want to pose in front of the Dartmouth sign. Is there an answer that can be given as why there is no Dartmouth sign?
Yeah, because it's not Stanford, darn it.
We don't need one.
I know we don't, but
we spent a fair amount of time talking about that too.
Yeah.
And one of the concepts when we were doing the West End planning, from the green to the blue, one suggestion that our consulting team made, we work with a sign consultant because we really need to figure out the 911 numbering on our buildings, as well as do we put names on buildings, which I'm sure you all have an opinion on. So that would be interesting to hear. But one of the suggestions that was made as you come across the bridge, there on your left, as you're coming up the hill, just after the entrance to Old Tuck Drive, they identified, you know, that would be a great place to put a sign that says Dartmouth College. We don't have a place to have your, you know,
Yourself.
picture in front of Dartmouth. I have seen students, or maybe potential students, hanging on to the, you know, post as you come in on 120. There's a little tiny sign. It's maybe a foot by a foot. It says Dartmouth College, and I've seen them holding on to it. Someone taking a picture. So something that we could work on.
Or you could climb to the top of the east stands of the football stadium and pose under the sign that says Dartmouth on the side of Florin House.
Yeah.
The other question I have is related to the green, and it's because I was sitting in on a planning board hearing on Zoom a couple weeks ago, and as probably as many of you know, the town and with the college is working on downtown improvements, street improvements, and so on. And I didn't realize that included the streets around the green. And so I sat in on the presentation of that, and I sort of liked some of it, sort of didn't like some of it. But Joanne, can you just talk a little bit about what you guys are thinking about around the green?
Sure. So the town has engaged with a consultant that's done a lot of work on transit and bike and pedestrian improvements around town. So there was some funding set aside by the town to do some planning to the sidewalks need to be improved and replaced on Main Street. So that's one focus. What should we be doing? What should the town be doing? The other work is on the four sides of the green. In particular, as we put back together Dartmouth Row next spring, what is the road going to look like? And there's a big push to have to improve the sidewalks. So go from right now, they're about, I want to say the ones in front of Dartmouth Row are maybe 5 feet, maybe 6 feet, increasing them to 8 feet. Do a better job of protecting the trees. But one of probably the controversial things too is those contraflow bike lanes. And so what that means is having bikes continue to have one-way traffic on 3 sides of the green, but you would have a contraflow, basically bikes going in both directions on those one-way streets. So imagine you're traveling by the information booth, you're going north in your car, you might have bicycles, you would have bicycles coming south on that same street. And so that is being seriously considered by the town right now. They also talked about kind of different surface treatments, kind of narrowing College Street so it's only 1 lane instead of 2 for cars. Not sure why you need to pass on that road. And having a different surface treatment kind of on the right-hand side in front of, or the east side of the road in front of Dartmouth Hall. So, you know, after hours, there could be parking there. It would protect the trees, but during regular business day, there'd be no parking there. So it's still there. The town is soliciting, I think after the planning board met a couple of weeks ago, they're now going to be taking it out for feedback from community members and to kind of get a sense of what would be okay for the community.
If you narrowed College Street to 1 lane, you would avoid people going down College Street the wrong way, which does happen. And it's a potential disaster for going the wrong way down College Street.
Yeah, they also are talking about, so I don't know, maybe a couple years ago, they enlarged the sidewalk and lost part of North Main Street. You know, they went from 3 lanes from Wentworth to Wheelock,
Right.
to 2 lanes for part of it. They're talking about continuing that all the way down to Wheelock. So you only have 2 lanes, a straight and a left turn lane, and then a right hand lane. The traffic people are saying that those 3 lanes it was designed back in the day when, you know, the 8 to 3 or shift at the hospital, that everyone left at 3 o'clock and the place was, you know, you needed 3 lanes to get everyone out. And now that you don't have that hour, you don't, that kind of traffic, you don't need to have 3 lanes there. So that was, I think, another thing that was proposed, right, Sue?
Joanna, who owns the green?
Dartmouth.
But they don't own the streets around the green.
And they don't own the trees.
What?
The street trees are owned by the town. Our arborist, Brian Beatty, works closely with the town to take care of them, especially our ancient elms. But yeah, the town owns the street trees.
Joanna, just one quick suggestion about an academic institution that has been for at least 50 years going through similar issues that you're facing now. And that's the University of Virginia. If you haven't talked to them, you might want to. They have, of course, they have geographical and historical constraints, especially with respect to the main, as they call it, the grounds, not the campus. 50 years ago, they moved 2 of the professional schools north to the north grounds, the law school and the MBA school. And they are developing along a central corridor between the 2 of those, which is really US 29, even today.
No, UVA is an amazing institution. Lots of great buildings and character and very similar. So thanks for the suggestion.
And they've also had to rework a transportation system to connect all that.
Lots of good planning work out there. Right here, I mean, right here. To be done. It looks like we're after the time, and it's my daughter's birthday, and I'm expected to be eating birthday cake in about 15 minutes. So if there are no more questions,
Happy
I will say
birthday.
goodbye.
Thank you very much, Joanna. We appreciate your coming and giving us our talk this evening. And yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Round of applause.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So Greg, you have the chair. What do you want to say?
A wonderful talk. Thank you for orchestrating it, Sue.
Yeah, it took us a while because of the pandemic, like everything. And I wish we really could have met with her in person and at the DOC house.
Yeah.
But being able to record it meant that some of the people that might like to see this from other alumni clubs or from groups like the architects group, that when we eventually get it on the YouTube, our new YouTube channel that Greg has set up, that other people will be able to understand it, because master planning is very complicated. And as I said at the beginning, there's so many different ways to do it that people assume that it's a plan. Here is what we are absolutely going to do, you know, boom, boom, boom. And it's not always that simple, especially when you have like a mountain to take care of and a second grant, and you have a river and all, you know, all these different parts of your campus, and you don't even have control of the streets that go through your campus. So it's a, you know, a tremendously complicated undertaking. And I think they really did a great job in getting input. You know, I was just amazed at how open the whole process has been.
Indeed. Well, I'm going to stop recording right now. So I think we've
Okay.